who I have here, I have Sister Cynthia McKinney, Dr. Cynthia McKinney. And Cynthia, she's been a member of the Democratic Party. She served 6 terms in the US House of Representatives for Georgia's 11th district. Also, part of that time was with the 4th district. She was re-elected several times. And then in 2002, she went out and started doing other things, other activist activities. And Cynthia, one of your activities was also helping and aiding the Palestinians over there in Palestine, in Israel. So that happened, and you were also in Libya in 2011. And that is the focus of this program, is your experience in 2011 in Libya. So welcome to Afro-Synergy News, Cynthia. Talk to us a little bit about your experience in 2011 in Libya.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me on your show, which, by the way, was a very important show during the U.S. orchestrated bombing and total destruction of the country of Libya back in 2011. You were bringing clarity, whereas the U.S. government, Hillary Clinton, Obama-directed propaganda machine was bringing obfuscation and just outright lies. So the first thing is that most of what people think happened around late 2010, 2011 in Libya is not exactly the truth about what happened there. And how I can say that is because I was there at the beginning of 2011 at a special conference that had been convened by the leaders of the Jamahiriya, who were looking at bringing members of the African diaspora back to Africa to relocate them out of situations where their dignity was stripped from them just because they were of African descent and not living on the African continent. And we received testimony, and this was a conference that was attended by thousands of people. And we were encouraged, if you can't live in dignity in Europe or the U.S. or the Americas, then live in dignity in Africa. That was sort of like the theme of the conference. And like I said, there were literally thousands of people attending this conference. So it was at the end of the conference that news media began to report that the Libyan government, of course, a government of 7 million people, got reduced to one person. And so Libya became equated with Muammar Gaddafi, although that was far from the case. But at any rate, Libya was supposed to be bombing its own people. Well, now the conference, people who attended the conference were still there in Tripoli. So there was, it was just like impossible for it to happen. But as Julian Assange says on the WikiLeaks T-shirts, that of which I have many, if wars can be begun with lies, then peace can be begun with truth. And so my effort, along with yours, team, was that we would tell the truth about what happened with Libya and the Libyan people amidst the sea of lies that were told about what was happening in Libya.
Now, okay, so that's beautiful. I like, my favorite word right there was the truth about what was happening in Libya. So now, did I hear you correctly that this was 2011, right before NATO started bombing Libya, that this conference was being held there in Tripoli?
Yes, that's correct. Okay. That's why I knew that when they said, when the U.S. government said that the Libyan were bombing, that the Libyan government was bombing the Libyans, I just knew it wasn't true. Because those people were still there, from the conference officially ends, and then, there's all these after meetings that take place after conferences. And so the after meetings were going on from the conference. So I knew that it wasn't true that the Libyan government was bombing Libya, was bombing Libyan people. I just knew it wasn't true. And that was the beginning of the lies. That was the beginning of everything that you and I were fighting against in 2011. And eventually, I was able to get a really wonderful friend of mine to commit. I think it cost us like about $20,000 to get everybody there. I took about, I think it was about 12 or 15 people, journalists. I took them with me there to experience what was going on. And so there, and at one point, my lawyer was there on the day that Obama sent 89 bombs on one day to the outskirts of Tripoli. My lawyer was there to record everything. So, there was so much. It was just an overwhelming. It was an overwhelming experience of U.S. government lies once again, aimed at the total destruction of an important country and its people. Now, one of the other things that is extremely disheartening to me is to watch a war that was prosecuted by Barack Obama and then watch black people fall in line and say, well, if Obama's doing the bombing, it's okay. And this was the attitude of the Congressional Black Caucus. They disappeared. And I understand one current member of the Congressional Black Caucus told me a long time ago that he didn't represent Africa. He represented the country that the city, the state that he represented. So I understand that kind of retrograde attitude, that retrograde mentality can exist inside the congressional institution or the institution of the U.S. Congress. But for 40 people to basically be silent was just shameful, in my opinion. And so what? We continue to live with that shame every day as the people of Libya struggle to try and put their lives back together again.
And to this day, as an ex or former president, I haven't heard Barack Obama say one word about Libya since he's left the presidency. Not one word. Have you?
No. I think he might have said something about Libya being a mistake, but it's more than a mistake. It's a crime.
Right. And I think he said that before he left the presidency. He was president when he said that.
Okay.
Yeah. But okay. I haven't heard him say anything. So there in Chicago, there is a group that's giving him a little hell about the location, his proposed location of his library in their neighborhood. So that's a good thing, and I hope that those individuals bring up Libya in that discussion with him. They should give him hell about that.
I wish they would. I don't count on it, but I wish they would, and I'm glad that there's at least some opposition to the citing of the Barack Obama library in Chicago. I don't recall people in Chicago having, if you look at the statistics, Chicago is very interesting because all the while I was in Congress, I used to talk about Chicago, and I even went to the floor of the House when the Chicago representative didn't go and talk about Area B, I believe it was, where the torture took place. Mm-hmm. And so black men were regularly tortured. When I took the photos of Abu Ghraib down to the floor of the House, and the parliamentarian told me that I had to maintain the decorum of the institution, and I snapped back at him and told him, well, this is the decorum of the U.S. soldiers that this institution is paying. So I showed those photographs, and it was around that same time that the news was coming out about the treatment, the targeting, quite frankly, of mostly African-American men by the Chicago Police Department. But what did Obama do about that?
Nothing.
What Obama did was ensure that Rahm Emanuel would become the mayor of the city of Chicago. That's what Barack Obama did. All of the statistics, for example, Hull House, connected with Loyola, did a study with Loyola University, and they found that without any public policy intervention, that it would take 200 years for the quality of life of black Chicagoans to catch up to the quality of life enjoyed by white Chicagoans. Mm-hmm. Well, that public policy intervention did not occur for the 8 years of the Obama administration. The public policy intervention did not occur under the first 4 years, and now we're in the second term of Rahm Emanuel. The public policy intervention did not occur. So the citing of a Barack Obama library it should be considered outrageous, because Barack Obama's presidency did very little to address those inequalities that existed during the entire 8 years of his presidency.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And Chicago is also one of many sanctuary cities as well.
Well, that's in line. Rahm Emanuel served in the Israeli military, but he didn't serve in the U.S. military. So I'm wondering, where is his loyalty? Where does his loyalty lie? And a lot of other people have to start wondering, where does the loyalty of these people lie? Whose interests are they really serving? Now, let me just tell you that Catherine Austin Fitts told me personally that she was told by a Hillary Clinton Democratic Party operative that they would that the Democratic Party was dropping black people and adopting the Latino community. Mm-hmm. So now, what does that mean operationally? I think we're seeing it now, where the Democratic Party has staked its entire political future on people that can't even vote for it.
Not legally vote for it.
What's going on here? What's going on here? And black people should not just fall in line like the abused spouse. Right. They should actually say, okay, well, maybe it's time for a divorce.
So true, so true. So, it's very interesting that you brought...
I would suggest that you interview Catherine Austin Fitts so she can give you the context around which a comment like that was made, because now we're seeing the fruits of that belief and that comment. We're seeing the fruits of that with the DACA, the failure of immigration reform, the $26 billion was sent back to Mexico in remittances. That's a lot of money.
Right.
That's a lot of money. That means people come to the United States, their families live in Mexico, and they send money back to their families in Mexico. Now, I would say nothing's wrong with that, except for the fact that the U.S. foreign policy has totally destroyed Mexico, making it necessary for this kind of a situation to exist. My recommendation for immigration reform would be foreign policy and military policy reform. Get the United States pernicious presence out of these countries and let these countries have some self-determination. Then they will be about the business of building their own countries instead of coming to the U.S. and being mistreated in the U.S. And then the U.S. But you see, the purpose of NAFTA was twofold. One, the corporations take advantage of the depressed wages because of the neoliberal policies that are imposed on these countries by the U.S. So I would say U.S. political, economic, and military policies in the foreign sphere need to change so that these countries have the right of self-determination and they have the right to build themselves. The people of those countries can build themselves without undue interference from the U.S. That's one thing. Okay, but on the other side of the same coin, you had the depression of U.S. wages. So corporations took advantage of depressed wages abroad, and now, of course, they can come back because they've got a permanent tax cut from the Trump administration, and wages have been so depressed in the U.S. that they're just above survival in the darn U.S.
Okay.
So the corporations use immigration policy as a labor policy, and the U.S. has adopted immigration as a labor policy for the U.S., just as war is an energy policy for the U.S. So we've got to have people in these positions that we elect, whether it's the presidency or the members of Congress. We've got to have people in there who are innovative, creative thinking, and who are not slaves to a political party whose agenda does not match that of the voter.
No.
But unfortunately, yes.
Now, on that equation, hold your thought, keep that thought. But on that equation, here comes money. Money comes into the equation. Even in 2002, part of what happened in Georgia related to some things, a group from the outside funneling a hell of a lot of money in and votes in against you. You were that innovative candidate. Now, you could have many other Cynthia McKinneys like you coming along, but then there's all of this money. So talk about that.
Well, you're absolutely right. And that then puts an extra burden, which should be received with joy, on the voters for discernment and understanding who the candidates are that they are facing. And so the voters have to actually care and not just be sheeple being herded into Democrat Party, Republican Party. And I would say that our position is that no party can represent our views better than us. And so it's incumbent upon us to select candidates, not parties, because we don't have a parliamentary system in the U.S. The system is about individuals who choose to adhere to one political party or another for the purpose of getting elected. It's a whole different thing. And even if we saw the strains to which the Democratic Party put itself in order to ensure that Hillary Clinton the butcher of Haitian democracy and Libyan direct democracy, would be the nominee. And the Democratic Party had to work very hard in order to steal the election from Bernie. But then Bernie went along with the theft and then even had the audacity to endorse Hillary Clinton.
Right.
So this Bernie had the opportunity to do to the Democratic Party what Donald Trump did with the Republican Party. But Bernie did not do that. People were ready. And Jill Stein, I have to give her credit, that Jill Stein of the Green Party pursued Bernie and said, run as a Green, run on the Green line. There was the opportunity for Bernie to do remember what Joe Lieberman did? Joe Lieberman lost the Democratic nomination and then ran as an independent.
Right, and then ran as John McCain's vice president nominee. Yeah, okay, go ahead. Yes.
That's right. Yeah. So now, imagine if Bernie had not been tied to the Democratic Party, which I believe he was when he decided to run for president anyway, but that's a whole different story. And so had Bernie been a true independent agent, then Bernie's politics would have been a lot different. He would never have endorsed a candidate whose policy positions were antithetical to his, and he would have allowed the Green Party. He could have run on the Green Party line as an independent. People, I believe that was a moment in the political history of the U.S. where transformational possibilities existed. And the deep state was able to escape because Bernie allowed them to do so. And so now with the Beck lawsuit on behalf of Bernie contributors, in appeal now, the Democratic Party has come out and state for the record that it is its First Amendment right to select the primary candidate of its choice and to back that candidate and to rig the election in order to make sure that candidate wins the nomination.
Hillary Clinton.
Well, all of that was done against me by the Democrats. As I said on my election night, I said that the Republicans wanted to beat me more than the Democrats wanted to keep me. Mm-hmm. And so what happened, that was election night 2002, but honestly, we're seeing it in full bloom, and we saw it in full bloom in 2016. So it took 14 years for people to catch up to what my experience was, for a Democratic Party loyalist to catch up to what the Democratic Party did to me. It took 14 years. In terms of the pressures that are put on candidates who run for Congress and the money, should they choose one path over another path, the money that comes to them, it has taken 26 years, T. Because that was in 1992 that I exposed what happened to me. It has taken 26 years for the rest of the political community to catch up to where I was. Mm-hmm. Now they know I was telling the truth. Then they said I was conspiracy theorist, liar, crazy, kook. Mm-hmm. They called me all kinds of names. The white males in the Democratic Party called me all kinds of names because they could get away with it. They knew they could get away with it, and black people were solidly in the hip pocket of the Democratic Party, and they weren't going to go anywhere.
And we saw what happened to Donna Brazile.
Yeah, well, Donna Brazile was part of those who knew what was going on in 2002 and in 1992.
Yes.
And here's the thing. I know all these people very well.
Uh-huh.
So the difference between Donna Brazile is that she was directly connected to the reward.
True.
So I can understand her position. She was directly connected. She got book deals. She got CNN contract. So she was able to receive all of the largesse that was extended to somebody who played the game,
right?
Who stayed in their lane, who remained quiet about the things that should have mattered to Donna a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so she received all of that. But what about the voters who continue to stay in their lane even though they get nothing?
Ah, yes.
You look at your material condition. You look at your material condition and you say, okay, they say the economy is growing. The question that should be asked by every voter is, well, for whom is the economy growing? Is it growing for me?
Mm-hmm.
And if your material condition is not better, then you don't reward them with your most precious political asset, which is your vote.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we're getting into an entirely different conversation than the one that you initially wanted to have, but I think you have an important enough audience, and I know also that I'm preaching to the choir because I know who your audience is, because I was a part of your audience when you were trying to educate people about what was going on in Libya.
Mm-hmm.
I clung to your weekly presentation. So we need a mentality change. Remember, this is what I tell my students all the time. Steve Biko said that the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed, and they've got our mind.
Ah, the constituents.
And it's not that from Hollywood to the professional athletes. So there was a story I just posted on my Facebook page about Richard Sherman representing himself.
Mm.
Wow, this is a step in the right direction. The last professional athlete that I know about who tried to change the bevy of CPAs and attorneys and agents that the industry itself sends was Michael Vick, and we know what happened to Michael Vick.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So
there's no independence, and just like COINTELPRO targeted the political icons, COINTELPRO also targeted cultural icons who are our entertainment industry, and that's how Rahm Emanuel's brother, who is in charge of William Morris Endeavor, has control over all of the black talent.
Mm.
I mean, you just have to look at what happened to our independence at every step that you turn and you want to be a free-thinking, creative, politically involved black person, you are denied, or when they eventually catch up with you, you have to go to re-education school like they did with Lauryn Hill.
Mm-hmm. So constituents. So so there's a component to that when you talk about the constituents, the voting constituent people. There has to be, and it seems to be, well, it is developing more and more. There has to be an area or an institution or institutions out there that really educates and make people more and better aware of political candidates, and in keeping those political candidates on target, the voters. And that's a big part of what I try to do here with the Afro Synergy News channel. So I appreciate what you said relative to constituents. It is the constituents who have to keep a Bernie Sanders on target, or constituents who are aware who keep a Donald Trump on target. Or in the case of Obama, when you have over 98% of blacks who voted for him, not once, but twice, that group needs to be able to keep him on target in on items that are related, or interests that are related to that particular group. And that did not happen with Obama.
That did not happen. You're absolutely right. And I tell you something else that didn't happen. Black America did not select Barack Obama.
Right.
Barack Obama had been selected prior to his candidacy. So you see, the business begins, the business of politics actually takes place before the candidate announces. And so we've got to be involved in the business of politics, which is one of the solutions that I say is that we need to have these activists, and and it's not the activists that get the stories written up in Time and Newsweek, because those are I have a friend, a Haitian friend, who says that the problem with Black America is that they want white approved candidates. So you want your candidate who's going to look good to Time and Newsweek, but those are the candidates that were selected by the people who own Time and Newsweek. So we've got to be so sophisticated that it's all right, and that we even expect that our local, the Chicago Sun-Times, is going to dog our candidate, our preferred candidate, because that's the one that's going to actually help us. We got to understand the psychology of the business of the politics, and we haven't reached that point yet. And I'm just sorry to say it, but it's my experience for my reality, and I don't know how to breach that, because quite frankly, we're dealing with Hollywood, a Hollywood trained mindset to pay attention to the small things that don't count, and to let go the big things that do count.
Well, interesting that you mentioned Hollywood right there. There's been a lots of information and exchanges going on in the cyber world, out there in the social media world, and it pertains to this big blockbuster movie, Black Panther. Have you seen that movie yet?
No, I haven't. I'm grappling with myself as to whether or not I should pay to see it. So I'm wondering about, there was an article, I haven't read it yet, but there's an article about the business of Black Panther movie. So I'll read that, I'll do my due diligence, I'll do my research, and then I will decide if that's something that I want to contribute to. And if I want to contribute to it, then I will see it the way everybody else sees it. Otherwise, I will see it the way some other people, see it. Mm-hmm. So basically, I have received comments from people who are very aware, and so, like I said, just the presence of the this is from a white guy who told me that the presence of so many beautiful black bodies is worth going to see it alone, because we don't see that. That's not something that's shown. But like I said, I'm more interested in who's getting what, what's the business deal, what's the aftermarket, what does all of that look like, and then I will decide if I'm going to see it. But a lot of times, what I've read already is that the CIA guy is the is the friend of the Black Panther, which means to me that they're turning history on its head, because anyone who has done as I have done and studied COINTELPRO understands CIA is the enemy. The FBI is the enemy. The U.S. government is the enemy. And so even today, even under Barack Obama, here we started out talking about Libya. And the reason we're talking about Libya because it was destroyed by under the presidency of Barack Obama. So the U.S. government still is the enemy. So I'm sort of like, okay, I'm not going to take my political direction from Hollywood in any way, shape, or fashion. And so I want to know what kind of political system we should be looking at. There are so many political systems that are available to us. And what the Libyans had was direct democracy. And now Nigel Farage, maybe we will begin to see some legitimacy in direct democracy now that the Irish are trying to restore the provisions to their constitution for direct democracy, and that Nigel Farage, who orchestrated and organized the Brexit vote in the UK, has now dedicated the UKIP, which is his United Kingdom Independence Party, has devoted his party now to direct democracy. So now maybe black people will start following that example, but could have studied direct democracy under the Green Book, which I know you spoke a lot about, and the Green Book, which was written by Muammar Gaddafi, and explored the failures of the republic form of government that the United States now has, and that most countries around the world have and are having problems with.
Yes, and we know historically the United States and Britain has actually attacked direct democracies. We saw it with the president of Iran back in the 1950s, early 60s, where he was overthrown, and they had a direct democracy going in Iran at that time, but he was overthrown by the United States and Britain. So with direct democracy, and with Libya, of course, as you mentioned, we saw that happen in Libya, where it too was overthrown, and maybe it is because there are certain inalienable rights for the people that comes with direct democracy. We saw it with Libya. We saw it in the 1950s in Iran. But they were overthrown by the West. So,
well, here's a slight clarification, though. I will amend your statement by saying direct democracies practiced by peoples of color. Because Switzerland has direct democracy, and nobody is saying anything about direct democracy in Switzerland. Switzerland is just fine. Switzerland practices an independent foreign policy, and everybody is fine with Switzerland just the way they are. Europeans are, and European descendants are. But when people of color try to get, I was not aware that Mossadegh had gone to direct democracy in Iran, but when people of color tinker with political systems that might be more responsive to their needs, then they get bombed or they get overthrown. Because, of course, you know, the same situation held in Africa after the period of colonialism, where the period was neo-colonial, and they were trying to decolonize, and they were experimenting with all different types of political systems. Then that's when the Africans and the Asians went to one-party governance, and that was because they were trying to figure that thing out, and they were trying to protect their sovereignty. And so there's nothing that keeps us, well, let me back up and say that most of us now our experience with government under the republic form is that we give up our sovereignty, our personal individual sovereignty. We give that up to a member of Congress in the U.S. And then we have to go beg that member of Congress to do things for our neighborhood, for our community, that quite frankly we could do ourselves. Mm-hmm. So direct democracy adherents say, well, we don't need to give up our sovereignty. We need to exercise our sovereignty, and we need a political system that allows us to exercise our sovereignty. And that's what the whole point of the Libyans. When I was there at that conference in 2011, the announcement was made that $90 billion was being I stopped because I'm trying to think now. It might have been. Maybe that's not correct. It was $90 million. Mm-hmm. Sorry. Only the U.S. deals in billions. Mm-hmm. But so when I was at the conference in 2011, the announcement was made that $90 million had been set aside by the Jamahiriya government for the purpose of bringing to fruition the United States of Africa, and that they were going to use those funds to bring people back to Africa by bringing them back to Libya to begin the process.
Therefore, you target the biggest target, therefore, in Libya, after this got started in 2011, were blacks, black Libyans, and other black immigrants coming into Libya. Continue on.
Yes, and of course, you know, at the airport, at the Tripoli airport, it said partners, not workers. So there were only 7 million Libyans at the time. And of course, development is a huge task, and you need people. So basically, Libya was importing labor, just like Qatar and United Arab Emirates are importing labor today, but with a difference. And the difference is when they walked through that Tripoli airport, they were greeted with a sign that said partners, not workers. Mm-hmm. So they were treated and not mistreated. The way in Doha people have died building the stadium. And, you know, I routinely go transit through United Arab Emirates, although I don't do it quite so much now because I try to boycott the countries that help, you know, with the destruction of Libya and their airlines. But gosh, it's so, and since I work in Asia, it's kind of hard now, but I routinely ask the foreign workers, are you treated well? And if you are skilled, then you're treated very well. But if you're semi-skilled or unskilled, it's worse than the U.S. Mm. The treatment that they receive. And I question why countries even allow their people to go to these countries so they can be mistreated. Mm-hmm. But that also is because the development strategy has been employed that is not really about development. It's about serving the neoliberal needs. And so once countries are able to shake off, and that's why it's so important for them to have a rise in multipolarity in the international setting, so that so BRICS was founded for the purpose of helping to usher in a multipolar world. And then BRICS fell apart because divide and rule is one of those mechanisms of oppression that Paulo Freire talked about. Divide and rule is right up there, And so then they were able to do the impeachment against Dilma Rousseff in Brazil and put in the neoliberal U.S. lackey Temer. And so, you know, these countries are under attack. India then switched its relationship with Israel and the U.S. and is now getting military hardware from Israel, and you know, and not voting to condemn Israel when Israel bombs Gaza. So India has completely changed the heads of government and heads of state have both traveled and from India to Israel and vice versa. So you're seeing this wholesale shift in these countries because they're under attack, because what they propose is a bit of independence. Right now, you could say that the U.S. government or the U.S. deep state has its foot on the neck of countries around the world that are trying to be free and trying to be independent, and they can't breathe. There's no breathing room. Just like Eric Garner. Eric Garner is a metaphor for what the U.S. does in its foreign policy and in its military policy and its economic policy. And I've got a book that's coming out that looks at the black community in the U.S. as a member, as a recipient of the treatment that colonies around the world and dependent states around the world receive from the U.S.
Where they can cut off the air whenever they want to cut off the air.
That's right.
Now, a large part of that, if we're talking about nations, a large part of that has to do with central banks as well. So when you look at Iran and you look at Libya, Libya was not under the Western central banks. Iran is not under the Western central bank, and neither is Syria under Western central banks. But and all three of them had that in common, and all three are targets. So yeah, you know, a report just came out that talks about the biological warfare that was waged by the U.S. against the North Koreans. And I think people need to be aware of what their government is doing to other peoples around the world. But you know, that's slightly different. But onto the you know, who's a part of the Federal Reserve? Like it's easier to say who is not a part. And now, of course, Libya, since the fall of Libya, Goldman Sachs just stole, I don't know how many billion. 2 billion.
From the Libyan people. How much?
2 billion.
Yeah, they just stole it. Just stole it.
True.
And there's no telling how much was stolen from the Libyan people. And so yes, the central banking is definitely a part of the problem, and that's why I just came back from Mexico, the Anarchapulco conference down there, sponsored by Bitcoin.com, which is you know, the cryptocurrency. It's the website that serves for information and that sort of thing for cryptocurrencies. Mm-hmm. And the promise of, at least these young people think, that the promise of blockchain technology is that we can go around the central bank. And I do have to admit, although I still have to learn how to use these new technologies, but like, for example, Steemit is based on blockchain technology. There's no censorship on Steemit, and you actually get paid for your data, as opposed to Facebook using your data to pay itself.
Right.
So I'm in the process of shifting all of my social media presence is not that I'm going to leave Facebook because I have over 100,000 people, but I want to build the following on Steemit because some people or some activists are able to basically live on the money that they get from Steemit.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is another potential source of income for people, and with the philosophy being that is my data, it belongs to me, therefore I need to get paid for it, and not Zuckerberg.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, it depends on how good that data is. For example, right now, that model, like New York Times, Washington Post, the old, newspaper type models, they've been losing a lot of money over the last many years. Their data, their information, but because of the internet and because there's so much information out there coming from so many different sources, they are literally, collectively, they are hurting the Wall Street journals, the Washington Post, the New York Times, LA Times, etc. And CNN, MSNBC, all of them are beginning to hurt, and they were threatened by YouTube, they were threatened by Facebook. They started attacking YouTube, Facebook, and other social media. They were the first to start calling those sources fake news. But that is, and I think what you're alluding to, those are the new models that are out there, and more and more they're becoming successful. Go ahead.
Right, and we need to be a part of that. So here to sort of bring this full circle, here is in my opinion, the quintessential problem, and that is that I believe that as a community we're afraid of standing up. And when I say stand up, I liken us to the baby. And, babies crawl, and then they try to stand up, and then they actually walk on their own. The baby starts out breastfeeding, and then after about 6 months, the baby graduates to eventually solid food, and then they're walking and eating solid food and doing and operating as a truly independent being.
Mm-hmm.
As our community in its political development is still a toddler. So it's not even crawling yet. It's still in Mama's arms. And Mama's changed. Mama used to be the Republican Party.
Right.
Because remember?
Right.
The Democrats prohibited black people from participating.
Mm-hmm.
And then Mama switched from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. But at some point, the baby is supposed to get out of Mama's arm, jump down, and say, hey, I can walk. I can think for myself. I'm independent. And for whatever reason, Mama has been able to hold on to baby U.S. black electorate, and we haven't walked yet.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm hopeful is that one day soon we'll wake up and say, hey, we can walk. We have very strong legs. We can stand up. We have very strong arms, and we can build.
Right.
We can build for ourselves, and we can walk for ourselves. So we really don't need them to take care of us any longer. We don't need it.
Right, and the main issue, as you know, the main issue with the black electorate is that the voters is that since the 1960s, they've over 90% of blacks have supported one party, and that's the Democratic Party. That's been the main issue. So now you mentioned Nigel a moment ago over there in Britain, in England. You mentioned Nigel, but Nigel was also closely tied to Donald Trump too, wasn't he?
Yes.
Okay.
because the Brexit movement is actually the legitimate movement. And that's why when people are trying to regain their sovereignty because they realized that they were had for a song, their vote was stolen on propaganda, they joined the EU and they gave up their sovereignty, they gave up their individual sovereignty in exchange for being ruled over by people whose names they don't know and faces they can never see. And that's why the Greeks voted for Grexit, the Brits voted for Brexit, the Italians voted for Italexit, I guess. And that's why, because people ultimately want to be free. That's why I don't understand Black America not being ready to jump out of mama's arms and say, hey, I'm free and I can think, act, and do for myself now.
So a nationalist, it's more nationalism. When you talk about Brexit, you talk about what the Greeks, you talk about Italy. When you talk about the United States, when you talk about Trump, we're talking about nationalism. We're talking about some form of independence. Instead of what George H. Bush talked about, you know, 1,000 lights and this thing is the new order. Instead of what he was talking about, which would have been the European Union, all of that, and which would have been NAFTA and TAFTA, etc. But now we're talking nationalism. So is that what we're talking about?
Well, I think what we're talking about is a reassertion of, well, I think the face of globalization, the face of globalization has become neoliberal, which means that the economic circle is closed, the political circle is closed, and once it's closed, you can't get in it. And so people have been, through this centralization process, more and more people have been locked out. And people are waking up to the fact that through this centralization process, they and their voices have been locked out. So this centralization process advantages some people and disadvantages a whole lot of people. And that, I believe, is why you had those successive votes. Now, if you want to talk about nationalism, I would say it's a combination of nationalism and patriotism. Because nationalism, as you know, can become ethnocentric. And so nationalism can be positive, but nationalism also has a double sword of becoming ethnocentrism. And so I would say that double sword could be blunted somewhat if we say nationalism and patriotism. So patriotism then becomes the idea that I love the patria, which is the homeland, which is the territory, the country, the land. And everybody can be a part of the patria no matter what nation. When I did my master's thesis on nation. The idea of nation was the title, and so I can get a little bit deeper into this than is necessary, and I don't want to do that. But so you can have a country of many nations, and the patria encompasses all of the nations of the country. So I would say nationalism and patriotism as well.
Okay, now, so politics, economics. Now, just briefly, let's talk economics. You know, right next to.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to leave in a minute.
Oh, okay. Very quickly. Very quickly. We're gonna wind this down. So, you have Mexico right next to the United States, and then you mentioned about the billions of dollars of money that goes back to Mexico from those who work here in the United States, billions of dollars every year. Now, with blacks here in the United States, most of them, they don't have that sort of link back to a nation. Like you have millions of Mexican Americans. Some of them are citizens. A lot of them are not. They can send money back over to Mexico, and Mexico can send money over here, or they can send products and goods over here, which helps build up Hispanic communities in Chicago, Los Angeles, and they're big in Georgia now. Parts are going across the South now, but it helps that situation. Now, with economics and nations, blacks, for the most part, here in the United States, this nation within a nation of many people, they, for the most part, do not have that economic link where they're undergoing trade back and forth with Africa or with the Caribbeans, because most of our ancestors, before they arrived here in what's known as the United States, they were first in one of the islands, in Cuba, in Jamaica. They were out there in one of those islands first, and then your ancestors were moved on into the United States. So we don't have that connection. Most of our people don't. So just briefly, I know you got to go. Briefly comment about that.
Well, the fact that we don't, I mean, we've been conditioned. I sat in I got my PhD in August of 2015 now. It's been quite a while. Mm-hmm. And I sat in a room with a PhD student who said, I'm not African. Mm-hmm. I don't like to be called African American. And so the professor was astounded, and she said, well, what are you? And so she said she was black. She preferred to be called black. Okay, so notwithstanding the fact that all of Homo sapiens come from Africa, but this is a kind of a extreme version of the sentiment that exists within U.S. blacks, and it's an ignorance. It's a peculiar ignorance that has been bred over the generations into our people and exacerbated by the stereotypes that exist in Hollywood, that are produced in Hollywood. So we can identify with our oppressor more readily than we can with someone who is fighting our oppressor. Mm-hmm. And this is the mental condition, and this is a conditioning that continues to take place to this very day. So that's why I celebrate Richard Sherman, who says, I'm a talented NFL player. I don't need anybody to be an agent for me. I can represent myself. Mm-hmm. And it's about time that we have more people saying, I don't need Ari Emanuel to get a gig for me. I can get a gig on my own because I have talent. Mm. This is, really the most brilliant piece that I read was a piece written by Amafika Guka. I don't know how to pronounce his name, mm-hmm. but he's a African American activist, and he called it a league of our own. Remember when, I think it was Michael Jordan wanted to be a owner in the NBA and they slapped him back.
Right.
The NBA people slapped him back because, you know, professional athletics is very much like a plantation. You have a set of owners, and those owners are specific individuals with names and recognizable features. You know who they are.
Right.
And you have a set of players who, you know. So, anyway, when Michael Jordan got slapped back, this paper came through I received it in the mail. And it was entitled League of Our Own. And it was establishing a dream.
Mm.
And the dream was, okay, you will not let Michael Jordan be an owner in your league. So Michael Jordan, you collect all of the people of your income stature who have benefited through the athletics, and you create your own league. And then imagine how quickly that league would blossom, mm-hmm. just because all of the stars would be in that league.
Right, right.
So you just basically say, okay, I'm going to walk away. Donald Trump talks about the art of the deal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the strength of the deal comes when you're able to walk away from the deal.
Right.
The deal is on the table, and you say, I'm going to walk away from that. That's not a deal for me. And you walk away.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? You find out how weak they are, because then they come running behind you.
Exactly.
But we, the black people of the U.S., have not ever allowed let me just put it this way, not since COINTELPRO of the 1960s, mm-hmm. have we ever walked away from a deal. Whatever deal they put on the table, we accept, okay, it's either this or this. I had to, and then to wrap this up very nicely, a woman was shopping in a store with her daughter. Her daughter recognized me, and she went and ran to her mom, and the mom, and, you know, they're looking at me out the side of their eye. Me and my mom are shopping. Mm-hmm. And so eventually the mother, prodded by the little girl, comes and says, "Are you Cynthia McKinney?" and I said, "Yes." And then the mother goes on to tell me how sorry she was that she didn't have any choice but to vote for my opponent. and my mother rejects politics. My mother is not political in any way, shape, or form, right? Uh-huh. And my mother spoke up, and she startled me, and she said, "Well, you could have written Cynthia's name in." And the woman said, "I didn't think about that."
Uh-huh.
That's where we are.
Yeah.
The woman, so they knocked me out in the primary, and the woman is so habituated to voting for the D that she never even considered the opportunity that she had to just write my name in.
Uh-huh. So it's
something so simple.
Yeah, it's a matter of...
But when you don't think...
Yes. A matter of educating
we're in
and
a
informing.
condition where I didn't think about that.
Uh-huh. Go ahead.
No, that's it. But that's it. It's that you know, we're in this condition where too often we're saying, "I didn't think about that."
Right. Yeah.
We got to do better.
Yes.
In order to be better, we have to demand better. We have to do better.
That's right, and that's going to come with people becoming and being more informed. And so very often.
So I hope that they will.
Yeah, so very often people are so inundated with whatever their day-to-day issues and challenges are, that sometimes the little simple things, as the point you just made, the little simple things don't even come to mind. But go ahead. We're going to close out. So you have any closing words, Cynthia, before we close out? I appreciate you for coming on to the Afro-Synergy News program. We're going to have to do this again sometime also, especially, if you decide to go see the Black Panther. I'd like to bring you back on. We'll have a brief discussion about that, because that's been a huge, believe it or not, it's crazy, but it's been a huge social buzz out there. Black folks are talking about it like crazy, and you won't believe some of the ideas and imaginations that they're coming up with in their own minds about it, and they're relating it to the day-to-day lives of black folks and Africans. They're relating it to that. So anyway, some closing words from Dr. Cynthia McKinney.
Well, check me out on allthingscynthiamckinney.com. There's a contact us page, and I respond to all of my messages. So just check me out there.
And you also indicated that you also in the process of writing a book. Is that correct?
Yes. The language of the book, it's really bad language, but it's how the U.S. creates shithole countries.
Sounds like Donald Trump there to me.
I'm channeling a little Trump.
Oh, I love it. Okay, all right. Well, the listeners have heard it. We will be looking for that. So, Cynthia, it's been a pleasure having this conversation with you. We went all over the map, but that's okay. That's okay. I'll work with it. I will work with it. So it's been a real pleasure, and I hope to have you back on soon in the future.
Yeah, we can do a regular thing.